Merry meet and welcome. Welcome to the realms of mysticism, the occult, and magic, where your possibilities are only limited by your imagination. Welcome to the witch's cauldron and discover the knowledge you seek. Gather round the cauldron and even stay for a spell. Brightest blessings to you. Merry meet and welcome to the Witch's Cauldron. My name's Paula. Today I want to talk a little bit about and get rid of some of the common misconceptions about sacred sexuality, ritual sex, the Great Rite, and misconceptions out there about the Wiccan fivefold kiss. This video will not include any kind of graphic description or depiction of sexual acts. It will also just be a very high-level view of these subjects. It is not meant to be a, scholarly work. If that's what you're looking for, this is not the video. Click off. No harm, no foul. Brightest blessings to you. What I will try to demystify are where lines in modern vernacular, where the lines have been blurred with all of these terms. Sacred sexuality, ritual sex, the Great Rite, and the fivefold kiss. A lot of my observations come from a Wiccan point of view. My point of view may not mesh with everything out there, okay? A Satanist will have a different perspective on things. A trad witch will have different perspective on things. A traditional heathen will have different perspective on everything. I work firmly in primarily the Celtic and sometimes Nordic or Germanic pantheons. So that's also where a lot of my experience and reference that I can try and demystify some of this for you comes from. So let's go back. Let's go back in time. Let's get in our little time machine. And if you stop and think about ancient civilizations like the Celts, like the various Nordic and Germanic tribes, like the Picts, like the Druids, etc., etc., they did not have the hang-ups about sex that we do in modern times, okay? Modern times, when I was growing up, well, although that's like ancient times because I'm so freaking old, in the 70s and 80s, late 70s, early 80s, when I was coming of age, you were supposed to stay and be a virgin until you got married, and sex was only for procreation. It was supposed to be more of a chore and a duty than enjoyment. You weren't supposed to touch yourself, or self-pleasure or masturbate or whatever you want to call it. All of those were like big taboos when I was coming of age. And ancient civilizations did not necessarily have those kind of, they didn't have that kind of baggage. In Celtic societies, it was very common and acceptable for women and men to have multiple, for a woman to have multiple husbands or a man to have multiple wives, etc., etc. A lot of what exists about sex in the Celtic society comes from Roman writings. okay, and recounting a long time after the fact that allegedly Julia Augusta, the wife of Emperor Augustus, was shocked by the quote unquote loose morals of Celtic women. When she complained to one of the Celtic women who reportedly was the consort of a Gaulish king, was said to have replied something to the effect that we Celtic women obey the demands of nature in a more moral way than do the women of Rome. We consort openly with the best of men. You allow yourselves to be debauched in secret by the vilest. You can almost imagine that a Roman of those days was kind of afraid of this kind of open sexuality where it was perfectly acceptable for a man to lie with another man if he so chose to do, or for a woman to lie with another woman, or a woman to choose to have multiple partners of either sex. You can see why they would be threatened, because it was, you were supposed to be, especially a higher born Roman, supposed to be well behaved. Your sole interest is rearing the kids. Docile women are safe women. And it's pretty well known that Celtic women were some of the most fierce warriors out there. It was also very common for Britons to live in large circular kind of huts in a round house. And there would be 30 to 40 people sleeping in there at any, given night. So, kind of a safe bet that a lot probably didn't pair up with the same person night after night. So, to go and say now, from a modern perspective, that this, freeness about sex was, made them more spiritually closer to whatever, I don't necessarily buy it. I call that kind of the revisionist part. And I take it with kind of a grain of salt, because especially with, Picts and Celts, there wasn't a written history. And a lot of the history comes from Roman writings that came from much later. And again, it's like writing down, or it came from Ireland, and it was written down much after, the occurrence. So, where we get a big mishmash is among, I'll call it, neo-Wiccan, neo-pagan, and neo-Tantra practices. We like to revise the way things actually happen to fit and make sense in a modern vernacular, to deal with our modern day first world problems, okay? When I refer to sacred sexuality with the Celts, I can't find anything that would back up the claim that they took sexuality and having sex as a pathway to the gods, okay? I think that what I have been able to find is more ancient societies accepted kind of ritualistic or ritualized sex at certain times of the year. That, for instance, walpurgisnacht, May Day, May Eve, there was another one, was it Floralia, I think, was another one, where, the symbol of the god and the goddess coming together repeating the cycle of seasons for the god to die at Samhain, come back at Yule. The goddess gets impregnated at Beltane, da 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 da. Okay? I think that it was perfectly acceptable for, revelers and celebrants to run off and do their version of, the god and the goddess and the Great Rite and the coming together of the divine masculine and the divine feminine in their personage. And I think it was more toward fertility than it was a connection to a higher power, which is where we kind of go into Tantra and Neo-Tantra, where Tantra is the practice of embracing sexuality to attain enlightenment. And I boiled that down to just the very basic, okay? And traditional Tantra takes years of practice. It's a daily practice. It's highly disciplined. And more of what people think of as Tantra is actually Neo-Tantra. In other words, it's been kind of morphed over the last 150 years to fit a more modern viewpoint and modern practice. And it's very easy to see how those lines got blurred between what was meant by sacred sexuality and ritualistic sex. Okay, I think that, they had to put a spin, for lack of a better term, on embracing sexuality in the last 150 years to kind of that it was more spiritually centered for healing and ascension and transcendence, to put a prettier name on it, okay, for lack of a better way of expressing myself. And this is where things get really mucked up. In the 40s, along comes Gerald Gardner. And I can have a critical viewpoint because I am Wiccan. I am not a traditional Gardnerian Wiccan. I am from an eclectic trad, but I practice more traditional Wicca than I do Neo-Wicca. And when Gerald Gardner was putting together the dogma for Wicca, he borrowed very heavily from a lot of different cultures, particularly Egyptian high magic. Egyptian high magic often involved ritualistic sex. And Gerald Gardner was all about the high magic. He wasn't necessarily as much into the low or sympathetic magic that most of us do with regard to spells, okay? But he was very much into the ceremonial part or the high magic. Gerald Gardner was part of the nudist community, and he liked running around naked. So the rituals were sky-clad, okay? In other words, you were naked. Sometimes the rituals would call for an act between the high priest and the high priestess, or between two individuals who had been chosen ahead of time for a specific act, specific part of the ritual. And those practices had to come, and this is where we kind of go and take a, hard left turn down a dirt road. Those practices had to change in the 80s that came along, called acquired immune deficiency syndrome. When I was coming of age, AIDS wasn't a thing yet, and it became a widespread in the news thing in the 80s. Some of the leaders of the Wiccan community who helped make Wicca so popular in the United States ended up dying of AIDS in the late 80s and early 90s. And in fact, Scott Cunningham, who was one of the leaders, if you are Wiccan, you probably have one or more of his books in your arsenal. I've got probably 7. He contracted lymphoma in 1983. That's what it was diagnosed as. But then in 1990, he was diagnosed with cryptococcal meningitis. And he finally succumbed to cryptococcal meningitis in 1993, in March 1993. Cryptococcal meningitis is one of the very severe complications related with HIV and AIDS. Unknown and uncertainties associated with HIV and AIDS in the 1980s. A lot of the ritual sex practices had to change in Wiccan and other types of covens. You had to be smart. And in the mid 80s, we did not know how HIV was transmitted. When the disease was first come out, we were told it could be transmitted by spit, okay? That's how little we knew about it. And so naturally, you had to be very sure of who your partner was for any kind of ritualistic sex act that you might do, or a sex act with another member of your coven. You needed to feel completely secure about your connection and relationship. So at this point in Wiccan tradition, a lot of covens went to the ritualistic, using altar items to represent the Great Rite, which is the coming together of the god and the goddess. And it is represented by plunging either a staff, a wand, or an athame into a chalice or a bowl of water, an offering bowl of water, something like that. It is not necessarily represented by 2 members of the coven or the high priest or high priestess actually engaging in a kind of sexual act. Even today, the covens that I am familiar with that do incorporate renditions of ritualistic sex into their Sabbat rituals, it's either done through, a representation, or it's done by an established couple in the coven. Okay? And when I say couple, I mean it can be 2 women, 2 men, 2, a woman and a man, whatever. And they go off in private. It's not done like on top of an altar. I'm not aware of covens that operate like that. Not saying that there aren't some out there that do, the ones that I'm aware of and folks that I know in those covens do not engage in ritualistic sex in that manner. Now, another misconception is, especially about Wicca, the Wiccan tradition incorporates what is called the fivefold kiss. And when people hear about that, they automatically think it's something dirty. And it's not. Although the actual practice can kind of be modified or be a little bit different depending on your trad. What it involves blessing the 5 sacred parts of the body. And depending on what kind of trad you are, it depends on what are the 5 parts of the body that are blessed. In traditional Gardnerian and Alexandrian covens, it's blessed be thy feet that have brought thee in these ways. Blessed be thy knees that shall kneel at the sacred altar. Blessed be thy womb or phallus, without which we would not be. Blessed be thy lips that shall utter the sacred names. And blessed be thy third eye that sees all. That's the traditional Gardnerian and Alexandrian fivefold kiss. In many eclectic trads, it's blessed be thy feet that have brought thee in these ways. Blessed be thy knees to kneel at the sacred altar. Blessed be thy womb or phallus, without which we would not be. Blessed be thy breast or chest, formed in beauty/strength. And blessed be thy lips that shall utter the sacred names. And this blessing of the parts of the body can be done when you finish your initiate period and you become a full-blown member of the coven. It's very common when you quote-unquote graduate that your high priest or high priestess do the fivefold kiss, and they do your cingulum, which is a ceremonial cord that is knotted at the 5 different parts of the body. The cord is as long as you are tall. They put a knot in at the feet, one at the knees, one at the womb, phallus, the chest, and then the mouth. And then there you go. And then it can also be done as part of hand fasting, where the couple honors each other. And it can also be a part of drawing down the moon. So it all depends on your trad, where it comes from, and what the purpose is. It's not involving oral on various parts of the no-no zone. All right. It's not. I don't know of any trad that I'm aware of around in my area that would do anything like that. It's usually a blessing given. It's not anything to do with sex. So I want to kind of throw that off to the side. Now, as far as ritualistic sex and sex magic, the act of orgasm is a very powerful, energetic undertaking. So it only goes to make sense that the physical act of having sex is a great way, either with a partner or by yourself, to build energy. And sex magic can go for anything from finding a new job, to abundance, to a couple addressing fertility issues, health issues, anything that you can think of, you can come up with spells and rituals that involve the a sex act as the means of raising energy. It does not necessarily mean involving Tantra and sacred sexuality to do sex magic. With that said, in my own mind, it is a lot more intense when you engage in a sexual act with someone that you love and you have a very deep connection with than it is to have sex with somebody that's like, you're not Mr. Right, you're Mr. Right now kind of thing. Or, a one night stand. When you have that kind of connection on a deeper level, like on a soul connection, and I hate to use the term soulmates, and please don't throw around twin flames because twin flames aren't that common. It's usually more of a soul connection that I like to call. It takes things to another level. So it is perfectly fine for two consenting adults to engage in sex as a method to raise energy to bring about the intent of a spell or something that was incorporated into ritual. I know this is kind of confusing. I know that the blurred lines, and there's so much that, have been hoovered up by neo-pagan, neo-Wiccan, neo-tantric kind of practices, that the original kind of intents and the actual history of ritualistic and sacred sexuality, all of the lines have been blurred over the years. So I encourage you to do your own research. I personally throw my bullshit flag on anybody who tries to say that, well, the ancient whatevers in Baba. So unless you are speaking about traditional Tantra or the Kama Sutra or another practice similar to that, you've blurred the lines between ritualistic sex and sex magic and wanting to call it sacred sexuality, when in fact they were very rarely tied with a connection, direct connection to the divine, and calling for transcendence and ascension like traditional Tantra does. Okay? Your path to enlightenment being through traditional Tantra. I hope this kind of cleared things up for you. It may have confused you even more because I have to skirt around my words because of YouTube. And I try not to get too scholarly because I don't want everybody to kind of glaze over. So I hope that this 30,000 foot view helped kind of explain how the lines have gotten so blurred over the years, and there have been so many things misconstrued about pagans and sexuality and about sacred sex versus ritualistic sex versus sex magic, and how we got to where things are now, especially those of us who practice Wicca. and we have a very different way of doing things now because of modern day health issues, that didn't exist back in the 40s. So, with that, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this will kind of, dispel the myths around ritualistic sex that's associated, especially with the Sabbats of midsummer, which is traditional midsummer is June 24th. If you're Wiccan, you either call the summer solstice Litha or midsummer. So you actually have two midsummers you can choose from, or Beltane. And you also have Walpurgisnacht, the Night of the Witches. So with that, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Sound off in the comments below. What did you think? Did this help kind of unblur things for you? I hope it did. So as I always say, my friends, merry we did meet, merry we will part until we merry meet again. Be well and walk in love and light, everybody. Bye.